Rowan Vale had learned to live with silence, not the kind that came after snow, when the world held its breath and the trees stood frozen in polite stillness. This silence was crowded. It pressed in with bodies and heat and the shifting moods of wolves packed, shoulder to shoulder inside the asherage. Hall wolves who could smell fear the way humans smelled. Smoke. Rowan walked anyway. She kept her spine straight, her steps even, her face composed in the practiced way of someone who'd survived, by never letting anyone see her flinch. Her boots made almost no sound on the old boards. She'd trained herself to move like that, quiet, unnoticeable, easy to forget. But tonight, forgetting her would be difficult. 2 small hands were threaded through hers, one on either side. Warm, sticky with the faint residue of honey bread, Finn had begged from the kitchen on the way in. Their palms were soft with childhood, the opposite of Rowan's calloused fingers. Finn marched as if he owned the world. Lark walked like she was listening to it. They looked like ordinary 5-year-olds if you didn't know what to watch for. Dark hair, pale skin warmed by the hearth, matching charcoal sweaters Rowan had, stitched by lantern light so they'd look neat, and uniform so no one could accuse her of raising wild little half-bloods without discipline. But wolves didn't need eyes to know what. Mattered. Wolves smelled bloodlines. Rowan tasted panic like metal on her tongue as they approached the main room. The pack hall was already filling, patrols returning from the ridge, hunters with snow still clinging to their cloaks, healers with herbs bundled at their waists. The air was thick with pine smoke, leather, wolf musk, and the undercurrent of dominance that always swelled when two, many alphas and betas, gathered in one place. Tonight's meeting was supposed to be routine. That was what Rowan had told herself all day. Routine meant safety. Routine meant the wolves were thinking about boundary disputes and winter stores, not about the strange woman who appeared 5 years ago with frostbite and blood on her thighs, begging sanctuary and refusing to explain where she'd come from. Routine meant no one asked questions. Rowan's gaze swept the hall automatically, counting exits the way her body did when her mind was too tired to do it on purpose. Front doors, side passage near the kitchen, the small servants' corridor that led to the courtyard. All possible. All too far. Alpha Soren's chair sat at the head of the hall beneath the carved asherage crest and elk antler crowned with a wolf skull. He was already there, broad shoulders filling his cloak like he'd been poured into it. His hair was more gray than black these days, his jaw more heavily scarred. But his gaze was still the same, sharp and assessing, like he was always weighing what you were worth. Rowan had never known if Soren saved her because he was kind or because he hated waste. Maybe both. His eyes flicked to her and the children. He didn't smile. He never did in public. But his jaw loosened by a fraction, as if he'd been holding tension he didn't admit to. Rowan took the smallest comfort in that. "Rowan," he said, voice carrying across the room. Every head turned. Rowan's stomach tightened. She forced her face to remain blank, though her wolf curled inward, bristling. She'd learned the hard way. Attention was a hook. "Yes, Alpha?" She replied, loud enough to be respectful, not loud enough to invite conversation. Soren's gaze dropped to Finn, then Lark. His eyes softened so slightly most wouldn't notice. "You're late." Finn insisted on tying his own boots, Rowan said, her tone calm, almost bored. Finn looked up at her with wide innocence. "I did a good knot." "You did," Rowan agreed. Soren's mouth twitched. "See that you're seated. We start in 5. Rowan nodded and guided the twins along the wall to a bench near the back close enough that she could hear, far enough that no one could easily corner her. It was her usual place. Safe, she told herself. Safe, safe, safe. Finn hopped up onto the bench and swung his legs immediately, boot heels thumping against the wood. "Finn," Rowan warned under her breath. He froze, then switched to swinging silently, as if he were demonstrating he could be subtle. When he felt like it, Lark sat with her hands in her lap, eyes moving over the room like she was cataloging it. Her gaze lingered on the older wolves, on the elders' row, on the weapons mounted above the hearth. "You're counting," Rowan murmured, more statement than question. Lark didn't look away. "There are 7 knives, but only 3 are used." Rowan's heart jolted. "How do you know?" Lark finally turned her eyes to Rowan. They were Rowan's eyes, dark, steady, but something else lived in them too. Something older than a child should carry. "They smell different," Lark said simply. "The used ones smell like hands." Rowan swallowed. She tried to keep their senses dulled as long as possible, tried to let them be children. But blood spoke loudly, and the wolf in them was waking up faster than she'd hoped. "Just don't stare," Rowan whispered. "People don't like being studied." Finn leaned in. "Can we leave after the boring talk?" Rowan smoothed his hair back, fingers lingering for comfort. "If you sit quietly, yes." Finn brightened. "Promise?" Rowan's throat tightened. Promises were dangerous. "They made you believe in tomorrow, still," she nodded. "Promise." The meeting began the way meetings always did. Patrol reports. Food stores. A complaint from the eastern hunters about a bear that refused to stay in its own territory. Alpha Soren listened with an expression carved from stone, occasionally grunting approval or slicing through arguments with a single sentence. Rowan tried to focus, but her attention kept drifting to the way the room moved around her. Wolves shifting in their seats, sense sharpening with irritation, relief, pride, boredom. She hated pack meetings, not because they were tedious, but because they reminded her that she did not truly belong. Ashridge had given her shelter, but shelter was not the same thing as acceptance. She was tolerated. Her children were. Question. Rowan could feel the staring sometimes, the way certain wolves sniffed a little too deeply when Finn or Lark passed by, the way whispers followed her like cold wind. "Who's the father?" "Why won't she say?" Those eyes aren't Ashridge eyes. Rowan's wolf bared its teeth inside, her skull whenever she heard it. A murmur rippled across the hall suddenly, like wind traveling through tall grass. Rowan's head snapped up. Soren paused mid-sentence. The scent in the room changed, not because someone spoke, but because everyone did the same thing at once. They inhaled. Rowan felt it too. It hit her like a memory she hadn't asked for. Cold iron. Smoke. Pine. Crushed under boot heels. And beneath it all, a scent so familiar it made her vision blur. Amber heat, storm dark fur, and the unmistakable signature of the Blackthorn bloodline. Rowan's fingers went numb. The doors swung open. The hall went still. So suddenly it felt unnatural, like the entire pack had shifted into the same instinctive posture without a command. Even Finn's swinging legs stopped. Even the fire seemed quiet, the crackling subdued. A man stepped inside. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The air bent around him. Kieran Blackthorn walked into the pack hall like he'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains that crowned his territory. Broad-shouldered, tall, his presence taking up space the way a storm took up the sky. His coat was dark, lined with fur at the collar, dusted with snow. A wolf pelt draped one shoulder like a mantle. His face Rowan's breath caught. He was older than the prince she remembered, though the change wasn't in softness. It was in edges, lines at the corners of his eyes, a scar that ran from his temple to his cheekbone like a white slash through darkness. His jaw was harder, his gaze heavier, as if the crown had pressed it into him, but his eyes were the same molten amber that had once looked at her like she was the only warmth in the world. Rowan's wolf slammed against her. Ribs. Kieran. Her heart said his name like a prayer, and curse. The pack bowed. It was not a choice. The dominance rolling off him made knees bend, spines dip, heads lower. Alpha Soren, proud as he was, lowered his head too slowly, stiffly, but unmistakably. "Your Majesty," Soren said, voice strained with the effort of politeness. Rowan didn't bow. She couldn't move. If she bowed, she might break. Kieran's gaze swept the room, not lingering on trophies or banners, not inspecting the pack the way a king might. His eyes moved like he was searching for something specific, and Rowan knew with terrifying certainty he hadn't come here by accident. His gaze landed on her. It was like being pinned. Rowan's lungs refused to work for a heartbeat. Kieran's face remained unreadable, kingly, distant. Then his gaze dropped. To the children. Finn, because he was Finn, didn't bow. He didn't look away. He stared at Kieran with the blunt curiosity of a boy who had never met a powerful man he couldn't challenge. Lark's eyes widened, then narrowed. She tilted her head slightly, sniffing, her small nose wrinkling. Rowan felt the moment before it happened, like the world drawing breath. Kieran took one step forward. Then another. Rowan's fingers tightened around Finn and Lark's hands hard enough that Finn squeaked. "Mama," Finn whispered, annoyed. "You're crushing me." Rowan forced her grip to loosen. Her voice wouldn't come. Kieran stopped a few feet away, close enough now that Rowan could feel the heat of his presence, could smell him clearly. The scent of him unspooled like a thread wrapped around her throat. He inhaled. Once, his nostrils flared. Rowan's stomach dropped into her feet. That was all it took. Wolves didn't need words. Not for this. Recognition spread across Kieran's face with slow, dawning devastation. His pupils blew wide. His jaw flexed as if he'd been hit. His gaze moved from Finn to Lark, taking in their features, the shape of their faces, the curve of their brows, the stubborn set of Finn's chin that mirrored his own, the quiet intensity in Lark's eyes that belonged to no child of Ashridge. Then his gaze snapped back to Rowan, the fury that was sharp enough to slice. "Rowan," he said. Her name sounded different in his mouth now. Not a lover's murmur, not a prince's teasing lilt, a king's summons. Rowan's throat burned. She managed, "Your Majesty." The words tasted like ash. Kieran's single quotes gaze flickered, almost as if the title offended him. But he didn't comment. His eyes returned to the children as if he couldn't help it. Finn lifted his chin. "Are you really the king?" A few wolves in the hall sucked in a startled breath. Someone hissed Finn's name like a warning. Rowan's heart stopped. Kieran stared at Finn for a long, dangerous second, and impossibly his expression shifted. Not soft, exactly, but something inhumanly controlled loosened, and Rowan saw something raw beneath it. Hunger, grief, hope. "Yes," Kieran said quietly. Finn nodded, as if accepting that was reasonable. "Okay, why are you here?" Rowan's pulse hammered. "Finn, stop." Before she could speak, Lark leaned forward slightly and sniffed again, small face scrunching. "You smell like—" Lark paused, searching for the right word. Her gaze darted to Rowan, then back to Kieran. "Like us," she finished. The hall went dead. Silent. Rowan felt every head turn, felt every nose in. The room draw in the scent, now that the words had pointed them toward it. Her vision tunneled. Kieran went utterly still. Then he crouched slowly, bringing himself level with the twins. The movement was careful, deliberate, like he was afraid sudden motion might make them vanish. "What are your names?" he asked. Finn answered first, eager to be important. "Finn." "Lark," Lark said, softer but steady. Kieran repeated them under his breath like a spell. Finn, Lark. His gaze flicked down to their throats as Finn tugged at his sweater collar impatiently. There beneath the fabric, Rowan knew what he saw. The faint crescent-shaped marks, pale against skin, twin halves of an old symbol she'd once traced with her fingers on Kieran's chest when she didn't understand what it meant. The blackthorn crest, Rowan's. Knees nearly gave out. Kieran rose, slowly, carefully. He looked at Rowan again. His face was composed. Too composed. His control was the kind men built when they were trying not to explode. "Whose children?" he asked. Voice low enough that only those closest could hear, yet it carried anyway, because the room was listening with its whole body. "Are these?" Rowan's mouth was dry. Her voice came out thin. "Mine." Kieran's eyes narrowed. "And their father?" Rowan felt the old reflex rise, deny, deflect, disappear. But Finn, traitor that he was, piped up again. "We don't have one," Finn announced, as if it were a fact about the weather. Rowan's heart cracked. Kieran's gaze dropped to Finn, then to Lark, then back to Rowan with something like pain. "You let them believe that," he said, very softly. Rowan's hands trembled. "They have me." "They have you," Kieran repeated, and his voice tightened. "And I was supposed to be there." Rowan's throat closed. The hall felt too hot, too bright, too full of eyes. Alpha Soren stepped forward, breaking the spell like a stone thrown into still water. "Your Majesty," Soren said carefully, "perhaps this should be discussed privately." Kieran didn't look away from Rowan. "Perhaps." Rowan's wolf snapped inside her. Run. Every instinct screamed it, but Finn and Lark were pressed against her, trusting, watching. Kieran extended his hand to the twins, this time to her. The gesture was a command disguised as an invitation. "Come," he said, voice quiet and absolute. "Now." Rowan stared at his hand like it was a trap. She imagined taking it. Imagined the bond waking fully. Imagined the pack's whispers turning into claws. Imagined Black Hollow hearing about airs and coming like fire. She imagined refusing. And she imagined what Kieran could do if she forced him to choose between his crown and his blood. Rowan swallowed. "No," she whispered, so low she barely heard it herself. Kieran's eyes flared, the king's temper tightening like a drawn blade. "Rowan," he warned. Rowan lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet that molten gaze. "Not here." Kieran's jaw worked once. Then he nodded, a single sharp motion. "Fine," he said. "Not here." He looked around the hall, at Soren, at the elders, at the wolves listening with hungry interest. "Clear the council chamber," Kieran commanded. No one argued. They moved at once. Kieran looked down at the twins again, and his voice shifted, still authoritative, but gentled in a way that made Rowan's chest ache. "Finn, Lark, will you come with your mother?" he asked. Finn looked at Rowan, then at Kieran. He shrugged like it didn't matter. "Sure." Lark's small hand tightened around Rowan's. "Mama?" Rowan forced her voice steady. "We're going to talk to the king for a moment." "Okay," Lark said, too calm, too trusting. Rowan hated herself for it. Kieran stepped aside, allowing Rowan to guide the children forward, but he stayed close. Close enough that she could feel him like heat at her back as they moved toward the side corridor. Rowan felt the hall erupt behind them, not in sound, but in scent. Excitement, shock, hunger. She could feel the questions, stacking like stones. Those children, her scent. The king. Rowan's stomach churned. At the doorway. She paused, glancing back once despite herself. Soren's eyes met hers. There was something there she hadn't expected. Not anger, not betrayal, worry. Rowan's throat tightened. Then the council chamber door swung open. swallowing them into dim stone and quieter air. The moment the door shut behind them, Rowan's composure cracked. Her hands started shaking. Finn looked up at her, suddenly serious. "Mama, do you know him?" Rowan opened her mouth. No words came. Kieran's voice cut in behind her, low and lethal, and threaded with something that sounded terrifyingly like heartbreak. "She knows me," he said. Rowan closed her eyes for a heartbeat, because the scent of yesterday wasn't just memory. It was a bond, and it had just walked back into her life wearing a crown. The council chamber was colder than the main hall, built of thick mountain stone, meant to hold heat in winter and secrets year-round. The walls were carved with old pack laws runes so ancient the grooves had smoothed with time. A long table dominated the room, its surface polished by decades of elbows and arguments. The single hearth was small, more symbolic than comforting. Rowan felt the cold immediately. Not on her skin. Inside her. Kieran closed the door himself. The sound of the latch sliding into place made Rowan's instincts recoil. Closed rooms meant corners. Closed rooms meant no exits. Finn and Lark climbed onto a bench near the wall, as if they'd done this 100 times. Legs dangling, shoulders pressed together. Finn's feet tapped quietly, trying very hard not to make noise. Lark's eyes moved across the carvings as if the runes were pictures. Rowan kept herself between them and Kieran without thinking. It was muscle memory. It was motherhood. It was the last 5 years of being the only barrier between her children and the world. Kieran stood across from her. Near the table, coat still dusted with snow. Dark hair slightly damp where the cold had melted into it. He looked too big for the room, like the stone walls couldn't contain his presence. Alpha Soren entered a moment later with 2 elders, elder male, who had a missing eye and a voice like gravel, and elder Wisra, whose hair was braided with bones and whose stare could strip flesh from truth. Soren didn't sit. He leaned against the wall with arms crossed, as if to remind everyone that this was his territory, even if a king stood in it. The elders took the far end of the table, hands folded, waiting. The air was thick with the unspoken. Explain. Confess. Lie. Bleed. Kieran broke the silence first. 5 years, he said. The words landed like a weight. Rowan's mouth went dry. Her heartbeat hammered in her throat. Kieran's gaze stayed on her face, as if he refused to be distracted by anyone else. 5 years, Rowan. You vanished. Rowan forced her hands to unclench. She didn't let herself glance at Finn and Lark, though she felt them listening with their whole bodies. You left first, she said, voice even. A muscle in Kieran's jaw jumped. I left to end a border war. Rowan's laugh was short, brittle. A border war. Soren's eyes narrowed. He looked at Kieran as if weighing how much disrespect he could get away with. Kieran didn't care. I sent word. You sent a messenger, Rowan shot back, to a den that had already been burned. The room shifted. Elder Ezra's head tilted, interest sharpening. Soren's posture changed, a subtle tightening. Even Kieran blinked, as if that possibility hadn't existed in his mind until Rowan forced it there. Kieran's voice dropped. Burned by whom? Rowan swallowed, pasting smoke that wasn't in the room. Black hollow. Elder male made a low sound, half growl, half curse. Those carrion eaters still breathe. They breathe, Rowan said, flat, and they bite. Kieran's eyes went very still. Tell me. Rowan's wolf pressed against her ribs, snarling at the vulnerability of the words waiting in her throat. She had spent 5 years refusing to say them out loud, because saying them made them real again. Saying them meant the past could reach forward and grab her. But Kieran was here now. The pack was listening. Finn and Lark deserved something. A story that didn't leave them in a blank space where a father should have been. Rowan exhaled through her nose. Slow and controlled. I was staying in the border dens, she began, voice measured, with my mother. It wasn't even a proper den, more like a hunting shelter. We were between packs, off the main routes, quiet, safe. Her throat tightened on the word safe. We were wrong, Rowan continued. Black Hollow came at night. They didn't howl. They didn't announce themselves like wolves. They crept like men with knives. Finn's tapping feet stopped. Rowan felt it without looking. Lark's fingers curled in her lap. Kieran's gaze sharpened like a drawn blade. But he didn't interrupt. They came for me, Rowan said, and the truth tasted like rust. Not because I'd done anything to them. Because they'd heard rumors. Because someone had seen me with you. Soren's eyes flicked to Kieran, then back to Rowan, expression darkening with understanding. Kieran's voice came low, dangerous. Rumors. Rowan nodded. They wanted leverage. A bargaining chip. A way to get close to Blackthorn without throwing themselves against your walls. She paused. The next part was harder. My mother tried to fight, Rowan whispered. She was older, but she was Pack. She had claws and pride. She told me to run. Rowan's breath trembled. She didn't let it show. I didn't want to, she continued, voice tightening, but she shoved me out the back. And I heard them. She stopped. The words tangled, refusing to form. Kieran's hands clenched at his sides. Rowan. She inhaled once, sharp. I heard them kill her. Silence slammed into the room. Elder Male's remaining eye softened, barely. Elder Ezra's lips pressed into a thin line. Soren's arms dropped from his chest. Hands hanging at his sides like he'd forgotten what to do with them. And Kieran looked like someone had reached inside him and torn something out. He didn't move. He didn't blink. But his dominance flared in a pulse that made the air taste like lightning. I looked for you, he said, voice hoarse. When I returned, I looked everywhere. Rowan's chest tightened. You returned to your court and your war councils and your... I returned and found your trail. Kieran snapped, then forced himself to lower his tone. I found blood. I found ash. I found nothing that told me you lived. Rowan's mouth twisted. And you assumed I was dead. Kieran's gaze burned. Wouldn't you have, if you'd seen what I saw? Rowan said nothing, because she had assumed she was dead too for a while. She had felt her life leak out into the snow, and wondered if it would be easier to let it. Kieran stepped closer to the table, fingers splayed against the wood as if he needed something solid. And Ashridge? Rowan's eyes flicked to Soren, then away. I crawled into your territory half-frozen and bleeding. I didn't know where else to go. Black Hollow was hunting me. I needed a pack that could hide me. Soren's face tightened. You were delirious, he said quietly. You barely knew your own name. Rowan's voice softened, despite her effort. Because names are hooks. Soren's gaze dropped for a moment, guilt flickering. I should have asked more. I should have. No, Rowan cut in. You did what you could. You gave us shelter. She didn't say the rest. You didn't ask questions because you didn't want answers. Kieran's gaze landed on Finn and Lark again, as if they were the true center of every word. And the children, he said, voice controlled to the point of pain. When did you know? Rowan swallowed. Not immediately. Kieran's eyes narrowed. You didn't know you were carrying my heirs? The word heirs struck like a bell. Rowan's wolf reared, hackles rising. I didn't know, she said sharply, because I was dying. Because my body was trying to keep my heart beating and my lungs working and my blood inside me. It didn't care about anything else. Kieran's gaze flinched at the bluntness. Rowan continued before he could speak, words tumbling now, unstoppable. I didn't know until weeks later. And by then, The rumor had already become something worse. Black Hollow wasn't just sniffing around, they were circling. She pointed to the runes on the wall without really seeing them. Pack politics doesn't stop at borders, Kieran. Everyone watches everyone. If anyone connected me to you, if they figured out what I was carrying, they would have come. Kieran finished, voice low. Rowan nodded. And they would have used the babies as bait. Finn made a small, confused sound. Rowan's heart clenched as she finally looked at him, really looked. He was staring at her with wide eyes, trying to understand a world where children could be bait. Rowan forced her face to soften, even as her chest ached. "It's okay," she murmured, mostly to herself. Lark leaned her head against Finn's shoulder, protective in her quiet way. Kieran took a breath, slow and measured, like he was trying to keep his temper from turning the room into rubble. "You could have told me," he said again. The sentence loaded with everything he couldn't say. Rowan's laugh was sharp. "And do what? Send a royal guard to Ashridge? March in here with banners and declare me your mate?" Kieran's eyes flashed. "I would have." Rowan's voice rose. "That would have killed us?" Soren pushed off the wall, stepping forward. "Enough," he warned, but his voice carried less authority than usual. "A king in your council chamber did that to a man." Kieran didn't take his gaze off Rowan. "You decided for me." "I decided for them," Rowan snapped, pointing at the twins. "I decided they deserved a chance to live without every ambitious pack and enemy clan sniffing for royal blood. And I didn't deserve to know I had children." Kieran's voice cracked slightly on the last word, the controls slipping for the first time. Rowan froze. Because there it was, something raw, something human. Not anger. Grief. Rowan's throat tightened painfully. She wanted to say she hadn't meant to steal them from him, that she'd only been trying to keep them breathing, that she'd been terrified and alone and full of ghosts. But the pack law was carved in stone. The crown was carved in blood. And Kieran Blackthorne was not a man who lost what was his. Finn suddenly hopped down from the bench. Rowan's stomach lurched. Finn. He ignored her and marched across the chamber like a tiny soldier approaching a general. He stopped a few feet from Kieran, planted his hands on his hips, and stared up. "If you're my father," Finn said, blunt as a hammer, "why didn't you come?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Rowan's breath stopped. Kieran froze. Rowan watched the question hit him in real time, watched the king's control strain against something softer. His gaze dropped to Finn's face, then flicked to Lark, then back to Rowan, like he was trying to find an answer in her. Kieran lowered himself to one knee. Not in submission. Never that. But in choice. "I didn't know you existed," he said. Voice rough. Finn's face scrunched. "That's not a good reason." Elder male made a sound suspiciously like a snort. Kieran's mouth twitched once, but it wasn't humor. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "It isn't." Finn's eyes narrowed, suspicious. "Would you have come if you knew?" Kieran's gaze held steady. "Yes." Finn leaned closer, as if trying to smell lies. "Promise?" Kieran's throat bobbed. His voice came low, solemn. "On my crown," he said. "On my blood." Finn studied him another moment, then nodded as if accepting the oath. He turned and trotted back to Rowan, like the problem was solved. Rowan's heart was in pieces. Lark slid off the bench more slowly. She walked up to Kieran with cautious steps, head tilted, eyes intense. "You're angry," she said. Kieran blinked, caught off guard. "Yes." Lark nodded, as if that made sense. Then her small hand lifted, and she gently touched his cheek, fingers warm against his skin. Kieran didn't move. Rowan's breath caught. Lark's voice was quiet. "You're sad, too." Kieran's eyes flickered. For a heartbeat, His face softened. Yes, he whispered. Lark pulled her hand back, satisfied, and returned to Rowan without fear. She slipped her fingers into Rowan's again, anchoring herself. Kieran rose slowly, and as he stood, the atmosphere shifted. The softness vanished, not because it wasn't real, but because it wasn't safe to show. He turned to Rowan, and the king returned fully to his bones. They are mine, he said, not as a claim of possession, but as a declaration of fact. My blood, my heirs. Rowan's wolf snarled. They are my children, and I am their father, Kieran replied, voice like steel. Elder Wisra finally spoke, voice sharp as a knife. Pack law states that pups of a royal line are under the crown's protection and jurisdiction. Rowan's stomach dropped. This was what she'd feared law becoming a weapon. Kieran's head turned toward the elder. His gaze was winter. Do not recite laws at me, he said softly. The room went colder. Elder Wisra held his gaze for a heartbeat, then looked away first, lips pressed tight. Kieran turned back to Rowan. This pack is compromised. Soren bristled. Compromised? Kieran's eyes flicked to him, brief and sharp. The moment I walked into your hall and recognized my children, every wolf in there smelled it. By dawn, half the northern territories will know the Lycan king has heirs. Rowan's blood chilled. She pictured messengers, whispers, enemies. Black Hollow will know. Rowan whispered. They already suspect, Kieran corrected. But now suspicion becomes certainty. Rowan's hands tightened around Finn and Lark's. Kieran stepped closer, close enough that Rowan felt the pull of his scent. The old bond stirring like something waking under ice. You cannot keep them here, Kieran said. Rowan forced her voice steady. You can't just take them. Kieran's eyes flashed. I can, but I won't. That surprised her more than it should have. He held her gaze. I will not rip them from you. Not after what you've endured. Rowan's heart stumbled. Then Kieran's voice hardened again. But you will come with me. Rowan's throat tightened. To Blackthorn, yes. Soren's growl rumbled low. Rowan is under my protection. Kieran's dominance rolled outward. The runes on the wall seemed to hum. Soren's wolf pressed against his skin, strained. She is under mine, Kieran said, and the word mine hit the chamber like a hammer. Rowan's skin prickled. I'm not. Kieran cut her off with a look. Then unexpectedly, his voice lowered. Only for her. You love them, he said, quiet but unyielding. You will do what keeps them alive. And what keeps them alive is a fortress, guards, and a name no one dares challenge. Rowan's mouth went dry. And what about what I want? Kieran's eyes held hers, and for a moment she saw not the king, but the man from the firelight 5 years ago, the one who touched her like she mattered. What you want, he said softly, is why you ran. Rowan's breath hitched. Kieran stepped even closer, careful, like approaching a skittish animal. His scent wrapped around her, tugging at something deep in her chest. You wanted to keep the part of you that was mine, he murmured, and you didn't trust me not to take the rest. Rowan's hands shook. Anger and grief and longing twisted together until she couldn't tell which was which. You didn't trust me, he finished, voice like a wound. Rowan's eyes burned. Trust didn't keep me warm in the snow. Kieran's jaw flexed. Then he nodded once, sharp. No, it didn't. He straightened and turned his voice outward again to the room. We leave before nightfall, Kieran said. My guards will escort us. Soren's eyes narrowed. This is not a negotiation. Kieran looked at him, expression almost polite. Correct. Soren's teeth bared. You walk into my pack and I walk out with my family, Kieran interrupted. And the word family silenced the room in a way dominance couldn't. Rowan froze. Family. The word cracked something inside her. She'd kept sealed. Finn tugged on Rowan's sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, "are we going to the castle?" Rowan looked down at him. His eyes were bright, curious, too innocent for the weight of what was happening. Lark's gaze was on Rowan too, steady and quiet, trusting her to choose correctly. Rowan's Wolf whimpered. She looked up at Kieran. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't triumphant. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, holding out a hand and daring her to jump with him. Rowan's voice came out thin. "If we go, you can't treat them like symbols." Kieran's gaze sharpened. "They are not symbols. They're children," Rowan insisted. "They're mine. They're scared even if they don't look like it." Finn opened his mouth as if to protest being called scared, then closed it when Lark elbowed him gently. Kieran's expression softened just slightly. "I know what they are." Rowan's throat tightened. "And you can't," her voice faltered. "You can't punish me by using them." Kieran's eyes flashed with offense. "I would never." Rowan held his gaze, forcing him to understand the depth of her fear. "Promise." Kieran's jaw worked. Then he nodded once, solemn. "On my crown," he said, echoing his promise to Finn. "On my blood. I will not use them against you." Rowan felt something loosen in her chest, just a fraction. She looked at Soren, who was staring at her like he wanted to argue, but couldn't, like he knew this decision had never belonged to him. "You saved us," Rowan said quietly. Soren's expression hardened to hide whatever crossed his eyes. "I did what an alpha should." Rowan nodded. "Thank you." It wasn't enough. It was all she had. She turned back to Kieran, his hand extended again. Not a command this time, not an offer. Rowan stared at it. Heart-pounding, got every instinct screamed that taking it would bind her to him in ways she couldn't undo. That it would wake the bond she'd smothered with distance. That it would pull her into the orbit of a crown that drew enemies like blood drew flies. But another instinct older, fiercer, rose above the fear. The instinct that had dragged her through snow with cracked lips. The instinct that had kept her children. Breathing, protect, survive, choose. The strongest shelter. Rowan exhaled. She slid her fingers into Kieran's palm. The contact was electric, not just warmth recognition. Her wolf surged, pressing forward as if it had been starving and suddenly found meat. Kieran's gaze darkened, pupils widening, and Rowan knew he felt it too, the bond snapping taut between them like a cord, pulled tight after years of slack. The elders sucked in a breath. Soren's jaw tightened. Finn's eyes widened. "Whoa," he whispered. Lark's gaze sharpened, thoughtful. "It's louder," she murmured, as if she could hear something humming under the skin of the world. Rowan's voice trembled despite her effort. "We're not done talking." Kieran's thumb brushed over her knuckles, brief and possessive, then still. "No," he agreed, voice low. "We're just beginning." He turned toward the door, not pulling her, but guiding. "Gather what you need," Kieran commanded, and his tone shifted back into kingly certainty. "We leave within the hour." Rowan's wolf snarled at the urgency. "That's not enough time." "It's all we have," Kieran said without looking back. And Rowan heard the truth in it. He paused at the threshold and glanced over his shoulder, gaze landing on Finn and Lark. His face changed again only for a heartbeat. Something soft cracked through the armor. "My children," he said quietly, like he was testing the words on his tongue. Finn grinned suddenly, delighted. "That means I'm like a prince?" Kieran blinked, then impossibly his mouth twitched. "You are," Kieran said, voice rough, something far more dangerous. Finn's grin grew. "Cool." Lark didn't smile. She just watched Kieran with that deep, assessing stare. "Do you know how to make Mama stop being afraid?" The question stabbed. They left Ashridge before the sun fully climbed the tree line. Not because dawn was a good time to travel in winter snow-hid ice. And ice broke bones, but because Kieran Blackthorne moved like a man who could feel a countdown ticking in his marrow. Rowan recognized it with a cold familiarity. He was already planning for war. The convoy looked nothing like the hunting parties Ashridge sent out. This was disciplined, silent, and built for speed. 6 riders in front, 6 behind, and wolves running the flank-shifting forms that moved like shadows through the trees. Kieran's men wore dark leathers stamped with the Blackthorn crescent. Their weapons were clean, oiled, and hungry. Rowan sat astride a thick-chested mare that belonged to Kieran's stables, he'd insisted, ignoring her stiff refusal of charity, with a single look that left no room for pride. Finn rode in front of Rowan, small hands gripping the saddle horn like he was born for it. Lark sat behind Rowan, arms looped around her middle, cheek occasionally pressing into Rowan's back when the horse stepped. Over uneven ground. Rowan held the reins with one hand and Finn's waist with the other. It made her feel absurdly exposed. Kieran rode at her left, shoulder like he'd claimed the space beside her as a right. He didn't crowd her, but he didn't drift away either. His horse kept pace without effort, dark eyes calm, breath steaming in steady puffs. Rowan tried not to look at him. Looking at him was dangerous. Kieran's presence tugged at the bond she'd buried, an ache under the skin that wasn't pain exactly, but an awareness, like a thread that had been cut and tied back together wrong. It pulled whenever he came too close. Finn, naturally, broke the tension as if it were a stick under his heel. So, Finn said, loud enough that at least 3 guards pretended not to listen, "Do you have a sword?" Kieran's gaze flicked to him. "I have several." Finn's eyes widened. "Can I have one?" Rowan hissed, "Finn?" Kieran's mouth twitched, almost not quite amused. "When you're older." Finn scowled. "How old?" "Old enough to lift one without falling over." Finn looked personally insulted by the suggestion. "I don't fall over." Lark's voice, soft behind Rowan, carried a dry certainty. "You fell over yesterday." Finn twisted, offended. "That was different." "What was different?" Kieran asked, and Rowan heard it, the careful gentleness threaded into his tone when he spoke to them. It wasn't a performance. It was him trying to touch something fragile without breaking it. Finn lifted his chin. "The floor attacked me." One of the flank wolves made a choking sound that might have been a laugh. Rowan's mouth threatened to curve despite herself. She kept it flat. Kieran, however, let a brief breath out through his nose-warm amusement that vanished quickly as his gaze lifted to scan the woods again. His attention never stopped moving. He watched everything. The way branches snapped under a distant step, the way the wind shifted, the way birds, DIDN single quotes T. Rowan, noticed because she used to do the same thing. She hadn't stopped doing it. Not ever. They traveled like that for hours, the forest thickening, then thinning, then thickening again. The land changed subtly as they moved north. The trees taller and darker, the slopes steeper, the air colder, carrying stone and resin and that sharp metallic tang that meant mountain water, running under ice. Rowan's muscles ached from tension, more than the saddle. She felt eyes on her, constantly, guards assessing. Wolves scenting. Not hostile, but alert. They knew what she was, the mother of the king's heirs. A liability. A treasure. A target. Rowan hated being any of those things. Finn got bored by mid-morning and started, asking questions the way only children could rapid fire. Relentless and totally indifferent to adult discomfort. "Why is your hair shiny?" he asked Kieran. Kieran blinked. "It's clean." Finn squinted suspiciously. "Mama's hair is clean too, and it's not shiny." Rowan muttered, "Finn, please." Lark murmured into Rowan's back, almost soothing. Finn is collecting data. Finn heard and spun around like a startled cat. I am not. Kieran's eyes flicked to Lark. Collecting data? Lark nodded solemnly. To decide if you're safe. Rowan's chest tightened so hard, she almost missed a step in the horse's rhythm. Kieran went still in his saddle. Not in body, but in spirit, as if those words had struck somewhere deep. And what have you decided? He asked, voice careful. Lark studied him. Her gaze was far too old for her small face. You're dangerous, she said simply. Rowan's stomach dropped. Finn perked up, delighted. Cool, Lark continued, unbothered. But you're dangerous in the direction of enemies. Kieran's throat bobbed. He glanced at Rowan, something like surprise and gratitude flickering before he smoothed it. A way Rowan couldn't breathe properly. She'd spent 5 years teaching them caution, teaching them to hide, teaching them that the world wasn't safe. And still, her daughter had looked at a king and decided she could read his intentions like a book. The thought terrified Rowan almost as much as it comforted her. By midday, the wind sharpened and the sky turned that pale, washed-out color that made the world feel like it had been scraped clean. They approached a ridge where the trees broke apart, revealing a sloping expanse of rock and snow. Rowan's wolf stirred uneasily. Scent hit her first. Ash. It was faint at first, barely. A whisper on the wind, but it curled into her nose and sank into memory like a hook. Burned timber, scorched earth, the bitter remains of something that had once been alive. Rowan's hands tightened on the reins. Kieran's head turned toward her instantly. You smell it. It wasn't a question. Rowan swallowed. Her voice came out tight. Yes. Finn lifted his head, sniffing like he was copying the adults. I smell cold. That's because you're not paying attention, Rowan murmured, too sharp. Lark inhaled again, more deliberate. It smells like old fire. Rowan's heart stuttered. Kieran lifted his hand, 2 fingers flicking in a silent signal. The convoy slowed, spacing widening, wolves shifting positions without a word. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. A machine made of people and instinct. They crested the ridge. Below them sat the ruins of an outpost. It was small, only a handful of structures, but it had been built well once. A watchtower stump, a low stone building half collapsed, a perimeter fence reduced to blackened, posts sticking out of snow like broken teeth. Ground around it was scarred, not just burned, ripped, torn, clawed, apart. Rowan's stomach turned over. Her breath came shallow and fast as the horse picked its way down the slope. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the char. Finn leaned forward, curious now, voice quieter. What happened? Rowan's throat clenched. She didn't answer. Kieran did. Raiders, he said, voice like steel. Black Hollow. The name felt like a curse, like something that should not be spoken near children. Rowan tightened her arm around Finn's waist. Don't breathe too deep, she murmured to them both. Just stay close. Finn frowned. Why? Rowan forced her voice steady. Because I said so. Finn's frown deepened, but he nodded. He'd learned that tone. The convoy halted at the edge of the outpost. Wolves shifted into human form, bones cracking, skin becoming skin again. Weapons appeared from saddlebags and sheaths. A guard handed Kieran a sword without ceremony, the blade catching pale light. Kieran dismounted, boots crunching in snow, and moved forward with the deadly calm of a predator. Rowan stayed in the saddle, too tense to climb down immediately. Lark's arms tightened around her. Mama, Lark whispered, sensing the shift. You're scared. Rowan's jaw clenched. I'm alert. Lark's voice was gentle but relentless. That's scared. Rowan swallowed hard. Sometimes they're the same. Finn craned his neck. Is there quiet? Rowan murmured, sharper than she meant. Finn fell silent, eyes wide now. Kieran crouched in the snow near the perimeter, gloved fingers brushing blackened ground. He held still for a long moment, as if listening through his fingertips. Then he looked up, gaze hard. Fresh, he said. Rowan's pulse spiked. Fresh? Kieran's eyes flicked to her. Within hours. Rowan's stomach dropped as if the earth had fallen away under her. A scout one of Kieran's men moved through the ruins, stepping carefully around charred beams. He re-emerged, face grim, and held up something Rowan couldn't immediately place. *A, strip of bark dot. It was carved with jagged runes. Rowan's blood turned to ice when she recognized the symbol cut into it. A crescent split in half. A message dot we know. Rowan's fingers went numb on the reins. Kieran's jaw flexed. They left this for me. Finn's voice, small now. What does it mean? Rowan's throat tightened. She didn't want to answer. Kieran didn't either. A sound cut through the air, a whistle. Sharp and controlled dot, not a bird. Not a human signal. A wolf call. Every guard shifted instantly. Wolves in human form dropped into ready stances, blades up. The flank wolves in animal form went rigid, ears pricked. Noses flaring. Rowan's wolf surged to the surface. Bristling. Kieran's gaze snapped to the tree line. Down. Rowan hissed to the twins. Finn looked at her, startled. What now? She yanked him backward off the saddle in one swift movement, not gentle. He hit the snow with a soft oof. Lark slid down the other side with Rowan's help, quiet as a shadow. Rowan grabbed both and dragged them toward a half-buried boulder near the collapsed stone building. Stay here, Rowan whispered fiercely. Do not move. Do not make noise. Finn's eyes were huge. Mama. Rowan cupped his face, her gloves cold against his cheeks. Listen to me. You stay. You protect your sister. Finn swallowed hard, then nodded with a seriousness that made Rowan's chest ache. Lark didn't speak. She just pressed closer to Rowan, small fingers gripping Rowan's sleeve. You're going to fight. Rowan swallowed. If I have to. Lark's gaze flicked past Rowan, toward the tree line. They're close. Rowan's heart slammed. Then the forest erupted. They came in a wave-dark figures dropping from branches. Sprinting from behind trees, sliding down slopes like they'd been poured out of the woods. Black hollow wolves, some shifted, some human, all moving with coordinated intent. They weren't wild, Dot. They were trained. That was the worst part. Kieran's men met them like a wall. Steel rang out, bright and cold. Wolves in animal form slammed into bodies, teeth flashing, snarls ripping through the air. Snow exploded under boots and paws. Rowan's breath came hard. She shifted her stance instinctively, positioning herself between the boulder and the fight. She could run. She could grab the children and flee into the trees. But the trees were exactly where Black Hollow wanted prey to go. A raider broke through the chaos. Sprinting toward Rowan's position, blade held low and hungry, Rowan's wolf surged. And she didn't fight it. She shifted. Pain flared as bones snapped. Fur burst through skin, the world sharpening into scent and sound and instinct. The cold became a crisp clarity. She tasted fear and blood and smoke on the air. The raider's heart thundered. His sweat stank of adrenaline and something bittersome drug, some poison meant to dull restraint. Rowan launched. She hit him like a storm, slamming him into the snow. Her jaws snapped toward his throat. He screamed and tried to stab upward, but she twisted. Claws ripping through his arm. Blood sprayed hot. Against her tongue, she clamped down. His scream cut off into a wet gurgle. Rowan released and spun. Too late, a blade sliced across her flank. White-hot pain burst through her side. Rowan yelped, staggering, snow turning pink beneath her paws. Her vision narrowed. Rage flooding her gut, she saw the attacker another raider, eyes glassy, mouth stretched in a grin too wide for sanity. He was moving past her, toward the boulder, toward the children. Rowan's wolf roared. She lunged, but something bigger hit the raider first. Kieran. He shifted mid-leap, body exploding into a massive black and silver beast that dwarfed the wolves around him. His shoulders were broad as a bear's. His fur was dark as night, with streaks of pale silver like moonlight woven through it. His eyes burned molten amber. He slammed into the raider with a force that sent snow flying. Kieran's jaws clamped down. The raider didn't even have time to scream. Kieran tore. Rowan's stomach heaved. Even through the red haze of wolf instinct. The brutality wasn't gratuitous. It was swift, final, protective. He turned, blood staining his muzzle, and his gaze locked on the boulder. On Finn and Lark. Finn was frozen, eyes wide, fists clenched. Lark's gaze was sharp, tracking everything with eerie focus. Kieran moved. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, positioning his massive body between the children and the fight like a living shield. Then he shifted back, human again, breath ragged, skin steaming in the cold. A guard tossed him a cloak, and Kieran shrugged it on without looking. Away from the twins, Finn stared at him as if Kieran were a legend pulled out of a bedtime story and made real. Lark stared at him, as if she were memorizing him. Kieran's voice came rough, urgent. "Are you hurt?" Finn shook his head quickly. No. Lark's gaze flicked to Rowan's blood in the snow. "Mama is." Kieran's head snapped toward Rowan. Rowan shifted back to human form with a shudder, pain tearing through her side. She clapped a hand over the wound immediately, fingers coming away slick and hot. "I'm fine," Rowan lied. Kieran was beside her instantly, too fast for a man. Eyes blazing. "You're bleeding," he growled. Rowan's teeth clenched against a wave of nausea. "I've had worse." Kieran's gaze swept her flank, his expression turning into something savage. A healer one of Kieran's attendants ran up, hands already pulling out bandages. Kieran didn't step back, not even when the healer knelt. Rowan hated how exposed she felt under Kieran's stare. Hated that part of her, the part that still remembered his hands, wanted him closer. The battle shifted behind them. A black hollow wolf shrieked as it went down. Kieran's men were pushing the raiders back toward the tree line. But Black Hollow didn't scatter like frightened prey. They retreated like they'd achieved what they came for. Rowan's breath hitched. This hadn't been an ambush to kill Dot. It was an ambush to send a message. The same realization hit Kieran. Rowan saw it in the way his eyes narrowed, the way his head tilted, as if listening for something beyond the noise. A sudden howl rang out, short, sharp, and answered immediately from deeper in the forest. A signal. Black Hollow began pulling away in coordinated movements, covering one another, slipping into the trees like ink sinking into snow. Kieran's wolves didn't chase far. They held the perimeter, weapons up, eyes scanning, noses flaring. Kieran stayed with Rowan and the children. That told Rowan everything. He valued them more than the thrill of pursuit. A scout returned at a run, chest heaving, eyes wide. "Your Majesty," Kieran turned, dominance rippling. "Report." The scout held out another strip of bark freshly carved, still damp around the grooves. Rowan's stomach flipped when she saw the same split crescent. Under it, rough letters scratched into the wood, not runes. Common tongue. 2 words. Show. U.S. Rowan's blood went cold. Kieran's fingers tightened around the bark until it creaked. "They want you," Rowan whispered, voice hoarse. "They want to force you to reveal them publicly. to make it official. Kieran's eyes burned. It already is? Rowan's breath caught. Not to the world. Kieran looked at Finn and Lark, and at Rowan, and toward the forest. His voice went dangerously calm. Black Hollow is testing my response. Rowan swallowed. And if you respond wrong, they'll strike where it hurts most. Kieran finished. Finn's small voice cut in, shaky, but trying to be brave. Are they going to follow us? Rowan's chest tightened. She opened her mouth. Kieran answered first. Yes, he said. Rowan shot him a look too blunt. Too much for a child, but Kieran's gaze didn't waver. But they won't catch you, Kieran added, voice steady. Because you are under my protection. Finn's eyes narrowed. Like guards? Like an army, Kieran said. Finn swallowed, then nodded as if accepting that math. Lark's gaze stayed on the trees. They're not scared of you. Kieran's mouth tightened. No. Lark tilted her head, thoughtful. That means they think they can win. The statement was so calm, it made Rowan's stomach twist. Kieran stared at Lark for a heartbeat, something like grim respect flickering. Yes. Rowan's voice was sharp with fear now. We need to move. Kieran looked down at her wound, eyes narrowing. Can you ride? Rowan bristled. Of course I can. Kieran's thumb brushed briefly over the edge of the bandage the healer had tied tight around her side. It was almost gentle. Almost. Don't be stubborn, he murmured, low enough that only she heard. Not now. Rowan's lips pressed thin. I've survived on stubber. Kieran's gaze held hers, molten and hard. And you don't have to do it alone anymore. Rowan's breath stuttered. Before she could answer, another sound came faint, distant, not a howl. A crack, a branch snapping under deliberate weight. Kieran's head snapped up instantly. His eyes narrowed. Form up, he ordered, voice carrying. The guards moved as one, tightening around them. Wolves shifted to animal form again, flanking the horses. Rowan's heart hammered. They're still here. They're watching, Kieran corrected, and his voice was ice. Let them. He stepped closer to Rowan, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. It wasn't accidental. It was a statement. To her, to Black Hollow, to the world. Kieran lifted his voice, speaking to his men. We proceed to the citadel. No stops except necessity. 2 scouts ahead, 2 behind. Wolves on the ridge line. He glanced at Rowan. You stay in the center. Rowan's wolf bristled. I can protect myself. Kieran's gaze slid over her wound, unimpressed. You already did. Rowan's throat tightened. Kieran looked down at the twins, and his expression softened just enough to hurt. You did well, he told them, voice steady. Both of you. Finn's shoulders straightened. I didn't scream. I noticed, Kieran said, and Rowan heard the pride he tried to hide. Lark asked quietly, Are you going to kill them? A child's question, too calm, too direct. Rowan's stomach clenched. Kieran didn't lie. I'm going to stop them. Lark nodded as if satisfied. Rowan turned her face away for a heartbeat, swallowing the sting behind her eyes. She had wanted them to have innocence. A life without war. Instead, war had found them anyway, because of bloodlines and crowns, and men who thought children were leverage. Kieran watched Rowan for a long moment, reading what she didn't say. Then, under the cover of the convoy's movement, he leaned close, voice so low it was almost lost in the wind. I'm sorry, he said. Rowan's breath caught. For what? His gaze flicked to her wound, to the twins, to the burned outpost, to the bark in his fist. For being late, he murmured. For letting you carry all of this alone. Rowan's throat tightened so hard she couldn't speak. Kieran's voice dropped further. Dangerous velvet. They came close to you. Rowan swallowed. Yes. Kieran's eyes went dark. They'll never come that close again. Rowan forced herself to meet his gaze. Don't promise things you can't guarantee. Kieran's mouth curved not in humor, but in grim certainty. I can guarantee this. He straightened. Returning to kingly control, they mounted and moved out, leaving the burned outpost behind like a scar in the snow. But Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't escaped anything. They had simply stepped deeper into the game dot as the trees closed in again, the light dimming under thick branches. Rowan felt eyes on her, not her pack's eyes, not Kieran's men's. Blackthorn Citadel rose out of the mountain like something the earth had grown to keep. Monsters in and keep enemies out. It wasn't beautiful in the way palaces were beautiful. It was beautiful the way a wolf's fangs were, purposeful, sharp, undeniable. Dark stone walls climbed the slope in layered rings. Watchtowers stood like sentinels, their windows slit thin. Old runes cut into the gate arch faintly glimmered against the snow, as if the mountain itself still remembered the first king who'd bled on its rock. Rowan's horse slowed as they approached the open gates. Her body wanted to recoil, not because she feared stone or guards or banners. She feared what this place represented. A crown, a claim, a life with no hiding places. Here, secrets didn't survive. They were dug out, polished, and displayed like trophies. Finn leaned forward, eyes huge with awe. It's bigger than Ashridge. Lark's gaze traced the runes. It's older, she murmured. It smells like sleeping thunder. Rowan felt Kieran's attention shift to Lark, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it smoothed into control. He rode close enough that Rowan could feel the heat of him. Through the winter air dot, the convoy entered. The gates closed behind them with a booming finality that hit Rowan's nerves like a hammer. Inside, the inner courtyard sprawled wide, half covered in packed snow. Soldiers moved in disciplined lines. Wolves ran patrol routes along the walls. Torches burned even in daylight, their flames steady in the wind, as if the citadel refused to acknowledge weather. Heads turned as they passed, eyes tracked. Finn and Lark. Rowan felt the weight of it, curiosity layered over reverence. And under that, something sharper. Calculation. Heirs. That single concept changed how a court looked at children. It made them precious and dangerous at once. Kieran dismounted first and moved to Rowan's horse without asking permission. His hands lifted to Finn, and for a heartbeat, Rowan bristled, but he didn't grab. He waited. Finn hesitated, then slid forward, letting Kieran lift him down. Kieran set him gently onto the stone, gloved hand lingering on Finn's shoulder like he was anchoring himself. Rowan watched that hand, watched how careful it was. Lark climbed down on her own, landing silently, then reaching for Rowan's fingers. Rowan's boots hit the courtyard stones, and pain flared at her bandaged flank. She hid the wince out of habit. Kieran saw it anyway. His gaze flicked to her wound, then returned to her face, expression unreadable. Now, he said to one of his guards, the West Suite. No detours. No crowds. The guard bowed and moved ahead, clearing a path with a sharp gesture. Someone stepped forward from the courtyard's edge. Tall woman in fitted black leather with silver stitching, hair braided tight against her skull. She didn't bow as deep as the others. Her eyes were a clear gray, and they landed on Rowan like a knife assessing a threat. Majesty, she said, the council is assembled. They've been waiting since dawn. They can wait longer, Kieran replied without looking away from Rowan and the children. The woman's jaw tightened. They won't like. I don't care what they like. Kieran cut in, and his dominance rippled outward. Even wolves not bowed visibly went still, the air subtly rearranging itself around his authority. He finally looked at the woman. Commander Vesa, your priority is my family. Vesa's gaze sharpened on that word again, family. It changed her face, just for a heartbeat. Then she bowed properly. As you command. Rowan caught Finn glancing between Kieran and Vesa with avid interest, as if already building stories in his mind. They moved through corridors carved from stone. Heat seeped up from hidden vents. The citadel smelled of iron, old wood smoke, leather, and the faint mineral tang of the mountain itself. But underneath it all, Rowan smelled something else, now that they were inside Culon tension, not fear. Blackthorn didn't fear easily. Expectation. The West Suite was a private wing overlooking an enclosed garden buried under snow. Heavy curtains, thick rugs, a hearth that roared with real fire. It was warm enough that Finn immediately peeled off his gloves and shoved his hands toward the flames. Lark walked to the window, palms on the glass, peering out at the courtyard below like she was mapping an escape route. Rowan stood in the center of the room, spine rigid, unsure where to put her hands, her pain, her anger. Kieran closed the door, not with a slam, with quiet finality. Rowan's shoulders tightened anyway. Kieran looked at the twins first. His voice gentled, careful around the edges. There will be people here who talk too much, he said, who look too closely. Commander Vesa will guard this wing. No one enters without my permission. Finn turned, eyes bright. Does that mean we're important? Kieran's mouth twitched. It means you're protected. Finn considered that, then nodded as if protected was better than important. Lark didn't turn from the window. What about Mama? Kieran's gaze went to Rowan, slow, heavy, loaded. She is protected too, he said. Rowan's throat tightened. I don't need. Kieran held up a hand, not aggressive, but firm. Not an argument. Not tonight. Rowan's wolf bristled. Her human pride did too. You don't get to... A knock cut her off. Sharp. Urgent. Vesa's voice came through the door. Majesty. Council. Kieran's expression hardened. Rowan felt Finn's body tense, the way children did when they sensed adults stepping into something dangerous. Kieran looked at the twins again. You stay here. Finn's chin lifted. We can help. No, Rowan and Kieran said at the same time. Finn blinked, offended. Lark turned from the window at last. Her gaze pinned Kieran. If you lie to Mama, I'll know. Silence. Rowan's breath caught. Kieran stared at Lark for a long heartbeat, then nodded once, slow and solemn. And I won't lie, he said quietly. And then he looked at Rowan, and the air between them tightened like a drawn cord. Come, he said. Rowan didn't move immediately. Her voice came out low. I'm not walking into a room full of your wolves so they can decide what to do with me. Kieran's gaze sharpened. They don't decide. Rowan's laugh was bitter. That's what every ruler says right before the knives come out. Kieran stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her. His voice dropped for her alone. Then let them see the truth, he murmured. Let them see that you are not prey. Rowan's pulse thudded. And if they try to make me prey anyway? Kieran's eyes went molten. Then they learn why this citadel was built. Rowan swallowed. She glanced at Finn and Lark. Finn watching her like he was trying to be brave for her. Lark watching her like she already knew bravery wasn't a mask. Rowan inhaled, steadying herself. Fine, she said. Kieran opened the door, and they walked out. The council chamber of Blackthorn was not like Ashridge's. It was larger, carved into the mountain's core, lit by braziers and a ring of runes that pulsed faintly along the ceiling. A long crescent-shaped table dominated the room, and the seats around it were occupied by men and women who smelled like power and old blood. They rose as Kieran entered. Some bowed, some simply lowered their heads. As if bowing too deeply would admit fear, Rowan felt their eyes hit her immediately. Then the children were not there, and that almost made it worse, because without Finn and Lark as visible proof, Rowan became a story again. A rumor, not a scandal. Risked. Kieran walked to the head of the table and did not sit. He stood. The room held its breath. Your Majesty. An older man began, white hair, sharp nose, rings on every finger. His scent was ancient and oily. We have waited. You will wait again if I require it, Kieran said calmly. Speak. The man's mouth tightened. Reports of an attack at the southern outpost. I was there, Kieran interrupted. Black Hollow is probing our borders and my family. The word family landed like a stone dropped into still water. Murmurs rippled. Sense spiked surprise, greed, alarm, excitement. Rowan's wolf snarled. A woman with gold beads braided into her hair leaned forward. Family, Majesty? Kieran's gaze swept the room like a blade. Yes. Another counselor, young, handsome in a cold way, eyes too bright, smiled thinly. Rumor says Ashridge hosted you today. Rumor says you found something. Rowan's stomach turned. Kieran's expression didn't change. Rumor is slow. He turned his head slightly, and Vesa stepped forward from the shadows, holding a small carved box. It wasn't ornate, just old. The wood smelled like cedar and smoke. Kieran opened it and removed 2 items, too small. Pendants silver crescents. One split clean down the middle into matching halves. Rowan's heart stuttered. She recognized them. She'd seen that symbol before, traced it on skin, worn it in secret until it became too dangerous. Kieran held them up where the council could see. I have heirs, he said. The room went dead still. Then it exploded in dissent, shock, hunger, fear. An elder with deep-set eyes hissed. Heirs? That is truth, Kieran cut in. He looked at Rowan then, not asking permission with words, but with something rarer, with acknowledgement. Rowan's hands tightened into fists at her sides. Kieran's voice carried, steady and absolute. Their mother is Rowan Vale. Every gaze snapped to her. Rowan lifted her chin. She did not bow. If anything, she straightened. She felt the room weigh her scent, her posture, her wound hidden under bandages, her history they didn't know. Someone murmured, Vale. The ringed elder's eyes narrowed. A nobody name. Rowan's wolf surged, furious, but Kieran moved first. His dominance rolled across the chamber like a storm. Braziers flickered. Several counselors swallowed hard, instinctively lowering their eyes. Speak of her with respect, Kieran said softly. The room chilled. The ringed elder's lips tightened. Majesty, heirs change everything. You must consider alliances, succession, claims. I have considered them, Kieran replied. And I will consider something else now, security. He placed the pendants back into the box and shut it with a click that sounded like a lock turning. Black Hollow attacked us today and left a message. Kieran continued. They know. They are watching. A counselor with scarred hands leaned forward. Then we should hide them. Rowan's stomach clenched. Kieran's gaze went cold. No. The scarred counselor blinked. Majesty. We tried hiding, Kieran said, and his eyes flicked briefly to Rowan, as if honoring the last 5 years without saying it aloud. It kept them alive. It also gave our enemies time. Rowan's throat tightened at that. It was the closest he'd come to admitting she'd been right. Kieran turned back to the council. Tonight, we set a trap. Murmurs surged again. Uneasy. The young counselor with bright eyes smiled. A trap requires bait. Kieran's gaze snapped at him, sharp enough to draw blood. Careful. The counselor's smile didn't fade, but his scent changed interest, sharpening into something that made Rowan's skin prickle. Rowan took a mental note. Danger didn't always wear black hollow colors. Kieran's voice remained calm. Black Hollow wants certainty. They want proof I will act rashly. They want my attention and my weakness. He leaned forward slightly, hands on the table. So I will give them attention with teeth. Vesa stepped closer, unrolling a map across the table. Guards moved in the shadows, silent. Counselors leaned in despite themselves. Kieran spoke with precision. We announce the heirs formally at the midnight bell. We draw every nose in the citadel toward the great hall. We let Black Hollow think they've found the moment. Rowan's blood went cold. She stepped forward. No. The word cracked through the chamber like a whip. Every head turned toward her again. Kieran didn't flinch. Rowan, you are not using my children as bait, she said, voice shaking with fury. Not after I spent 5 years keeping them alive. The ringed elder sneered. She speaks to you as if... Kieran's gaze cut him off. Enough. Rowan didn't look at the elder. She didn't look at anyone but Kieran. I will not do it, she repeated. Kieran's eyes held hers. The bond tugged ache and heat, and a familiar pressure. Like the world narrowing until only he existed. His voice dropped low, so only she heard. I won't put them in danger, he said. Rowan's laugh was tight. You just described putting them in danger. Kieran's jaw flexed. Then he did something Rowan didn't expect. He raised his voice again to the council. The heirs will not be present. Murmurs erupted protest, confusion. The scarred counselor frowned. Then what? Then the bait, Kieran said, turning his gaze back to Rowan, is me. The chamber went silent in a different way. Rowan's stomach dropped. Kieran. His eyes softened only for her. They want certainty. They'll come for what they believe is exposed. Rowan's throat tightened. That's suicide. Kieran's mouth curved faintly, humorless. It's a king's job. Rowan stepped closer, lowering her voice. What about being a father? Something flickered in his eyes, pain, and a vow. That too, he said quietly. Then, to the council, he continued. We make them believe the heirs are revealed. We control the room. We flood the halls with guards. We seal the citadel. And we watch for the ones who move wrong. Rowan's mind clicked into place. Not just Black Hollow. Traitors. Insiders. People who smiled too easily. Rowan's gaze slid, almost involuntarily, to the young counselor with bright eyes. He was watching Kieran with a stillness that felt rehearsed. Rowan's wolf growled inside her. Kieran noticed her glance. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if filing it away. The ringed elder spoke again, cautious now. And the mother? Kieran's gaze returned to Rowan. His voice shifted, still authoritative, but with a clear line drawn. She stays under guard in the west wing, he said. No one approaches without my permission. Anyone who attempts it will lose the hand they reach with. Several counselors stiffened. Rowan felt the weight of it. Protection. That sounded like possession. Her pride bristled. Her fear eased just a fraction. Kieran turned to Rowan again, voice quiet. You will have your choice after this is done. Not tonight. Tonight we survive. Rowan's hands trembled. And if your trap fails? Kieran's eyes went cold. It won't. Rowan stared at him, seeing the king and the man at once. Then she nodded. Once, sharp. Fine. Kieran's gaze held hers. But you follow Vesa's orders. Rowan's mouth tightened. I follow my own. Kieran's mouth twitched slightly. Try saying that to Vesa. It will be educational. Rowan almost smiled. Almost. By nightfall, the citadel felt like a drawn bow. Guards doubled. Wolves patrolled in silent pairs. Servants moved quickly, eyes lowered, as if the stone itself might hear secrets. Rowan returned to the west suite with Vessa at her shoulder like an iron shadow. Finn and Lark leapt up the moment Rowan entered, both talking at once. "Did you see the throne?" Finn demanded. "Are there secret tunnels?" Lark asked, eyes too bright. Rowan tried to smile. "No tunnels that I've seen." Finn looked disappointed. "There should be tunnels." "There are," Vessa said, deadpan. Finn brightened. "Where?" Vessa's gray eyes flicked to him. "If you find them, you're clever. If you don't, you're safe." Finn blinked, then decided he liked her. "You're funny." Vessa's mouth did not change. "I'm terrifying." Finn considered. "You can be both." Lark watched Vessa with quiet intensity. "You're loyal." Vessa's gaze paused. "Yes." Lark nodded as if that settled it. Rowan's stomach clenched at how easily our daughter read people. "How long until midnight?" Rowan asked, voice low. Vessa checked the corridor, then shut the door with a firm click. "Less than an hour." Rowan's pulse kicked. "They're really doing this." Vessa's gaze met Rowan's, sharp and appraising. "You don't trust him." Rowan's laugh was humorless. "Trust isn't the issue." Vessa's expression barely shifted, but her tone softened by a hair. "You kept them alive. That means you're not foolish." Rowan's throat tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means you should know," Vessa said quietly, "that the king has not slept since he smelled them." Rowan went still. Vessa continued, voice matter of fact. "He's been planning since the moment he recognized his blood. Not because of politics." Rowan swallowed. "Then why?" Vessa's gaze held hers. "Because he's afraid." Rowan's chest ached. Before she could speak, Lark touched Rowan's hand. "Mama," Rowan turned. Lark's eyes were serious. "If bad wolves come, will you leave us?" Rowan's throat closed. Finn's bravado faltered. He stared at Rowan too, suddenly small. Rowan knelt, ignoring the pull of pain in her side, and cupped both their faces. "Listen," she said, voice shaking with a force she refused to show anyone else. "I would die before I leave you.